Right, we can hear me and you will hear Nat shortly. Okay, first of all, thanks for coming out on this Sunday and taking time out from doing other things to hear some poetry. It's always great to have a keen or appreciative audience at a poetry reading. And thanks also to Joe for hosting us in a wonderful bookshop. Every time I come down here, I feel special. I feel looked after. And really, it's one of the best bookshops in the world. I think I can say that. We have Shakespeare in Paris, Shakespeare and Co. in Paris. We used to have collected works in Melbourne. This is definitely one, and City Lights in San Francisco. This is definitely one of the great bookshops. And I'm really honoured to be asked to read here with Nathaniel O'Reilly, or Nat as I can call him, I hope. As an Australian, we tend to shorten everything. But yeah, he's come all the way back home, I suppose, from Texas. And when you hear his poetry and his writing, you really get a sense of connection to his work and where he's living now, but also where he's come from. And his first collection, Unbelonging, has a lot of connection to myself and resonance about belonging, identity, where is home, and issues like that, or ideas like that. Nat's not going to come here every week, so we really need to appreciate when we hear from him today. And look, Nat, as I was saying, we're going to sort of read two sets, but if I read something and you think, Jesus, that reminds me of something, you, by all means, jump in and read a poem or something along those lines. Now, I'm going to start with a poem from this collection here, Small Town Soundtrack, which is up the back there, along with books by other poets, Nat's books as well, if you want to have a look at. I think wherever we live, we always like to hear work that's set in the places that we live. So place is kind of important in literature and writing and so on. And in Port Fairy, Koroit, around this area, I've written about it a bit, but how we write about it, of course, is going to be different to sometimes how you live here. Has anyone know or remember the palm tree of Rosebrook? Right. So the palm tree of Rosebrook was one of those iconic trees, tall and slender, with a little bit of foliage up the top, no practical purpose on a farm, outside a weatherboard house on the way into Rosebrook. And my family had, or my mother's cousins lived in a house on the corner near the bridge in Rosebrook. And every time we come to visit them, there'd be all the kind of iconic things you see along the way. And this tree, this palm tree of Rosebrook, was just one of those things. And when I saw it, I thought, all right, we're in Rosebrook now. And of course, it was planted in an unusual spot. It didn't really belong there, which is kind of one of the ideas in this poem is, can you belong somewhere where you've been transplanted? So this is simply called the palm tree of Rosebrook. It's the form of it is a pantoum, so there's got some repeating lines in it. Representing a district by the way it wavers, a tree that soars above a weatherboard in flat paddocks, seems to belong in ways I would like to belong. Something more than nostalgia shifts within me. It seems only right that it can be seen for miles, representing a district by the way it wavers. Always in view on those lost Sunday visits to the country of Uncle Alan, Aunts May and Sis, it seems to belong in ways I would like to belong. A farmer's quirk at odds with the cypress trees, gangly, stranded from the boulevards of LA. It represents a district by the way it wavers. A tuft of leaves, a trunk that is 70% water. It offers no shade, economic or practical use, yet seems to belong in ways I would like to belong. My cousins have passed away, but our talk will go on. Of reasons to be lonely when I speak of Rosebrook, a tree that represents a district by the way it wavers, manages to belong in ways I would like to belong. Thank you. And of course the tree's not there now. It got cut down a few years ago. But I think I finished the poem before it got cut down. And as a way of honouring the odd things around us. Now I've got a new collection nearing the end, and I want to read some poems from that, if I may, as well as some other ones. And the new collection is called Escape to the Country. Some of you might know the show. We've been fans of it, and I've sort of play on that show in that poem. The first poem I'm going to read is called Feldspar. And feldspar is that kind of pink mineral that you see on rocks, on mountains. And this poem is set at Coles Bay. Has anyone been there? Coles Bay and the Hazards. And it's an amazing place. And so the feldspar, and you get the setting sun or the westerly sun hitting it, and the whole mountainside seems to glow pink. Well, that's where it did in my imagination. Anyway, so this is called Feldspar. In a dark light, edges of the granite begin to shine. A breeze is rocking boats, but the blue gums are barely moving. Through the lounge window, the mountain looks back at me, framed by how I've been sizing up mountains since I was a child. Of being chased by shadows, inching across paddocks like spilt ink. The light shifts and the pink hue of feldspar catches my eye, reminding me it is not parents who change, but the way we see them age, sometimes uncomfortably. Sometimes there is only time to think when my body is in motion, falling into a rhythm of words, stubbing my toes on tree roots, the swaying farmer's walk. I trudge on behind you and the lives of people we rarely see. Those deaths we learn about on holidays. Other camping trips merge with seed pods on gravelly paths. We step around hollow logs, pull branches away from our eyes, carry the voices of people, sometimes reluctantly, like rubbing a wattle leaf between fingers, then dropping it absent-mindedly. Words falling and rising with a dirt path, hooked and twisted branches scattered about us. I follow your breaths around rocks, uphill, to a view where there is no news, no media, and we are not the centre of the world. The family I have left behind, and what that means here beyond arrival points. Feldspar, Banksia, Swamp Melaleuca, drawing me in like breaths to count the day to. Okay, keep an eye on the time. This poem, well, it's got a kind of a classic title. It gives you the sense of what it's about. It's called The Parents. Any night finds them earthed before a stack of Irish CDs resting near the bottom of the screen. An ecosystem of newspapers, pens, walking stick, half-open quickies scattered about them. What falls to me when I look at my father's face? Memory lines scored by skin cancers, his perpetual ageing grin. He steps bow-legged toward the fridge, 1.5 litres of soda water, blister pack of coloured pills, and he's pushing his chair back from the table, fox-eyed. My mother reads local newspapers into the night. Footy scores ignite her. She takes out her hearing aid to doze, talk on the phone. Go on with you, you're a good one to talk. My father offers a conspiratorial smile. Later confides, she's the best little worker I've known. Subdued muttering from a radio in a bedroom. Roast chicken, pasta salad, beetroot slices in a bowl. These images of my parents I carry on repeat. A lifetime of farming has come down to this: sitting in an upright chair, watching the races, pushing a walker 100 metres to a milk bar. All his life my father has stared at boundary fences. Now he watches the footpath for a familiar face. Each day their victory is to wake, swing out of bed. My parents carry paddocks between their chairs. Cow lines trail their glances. They have never flown overseas or boarded a cruise ship, berthed in 2 lounge chairs. They watch the footy, bouncing off each other like commentators. They can't believe how lucky they are. I'll read a couple of poems. Nat has been kind to take one of these poems for Antipodes, which he's the editor of. It's an American magazine that specialises in Australian and New Zealand literature. I'll read first one that was published this year, A Tin Kettling. Has anyone been on a tin kettling besides you, Catherine? It's a sort of a tradition that's, I don't know whether it gets celebrated anymore, but it's basically where a lot of people bang a lot of saucepans to kind of wake up the young married couple who might be sort of in the business of getting down to business. And so this is from a memory. It's set in a town nearby that starts with K. A Tin Kettling. They wander across paddocks banging saucepans. Neighbours, family, kids who can clatter a pot, ambling through summer light after milking. Cut paddocks, quiet gravel roads, the prospect of Christmas in a town that goes to Mass on a Saturday night. Like saying the rosary, they walk into ritual, led by what's expected, catching out a couple still getting used to being hitched. This makeshift orchestra of grins and kettles, banging, tapping, hoo-ha shouting, drawing the newlyweds out from a porch. You buggers have got a cheek. Get inside for something to eat. Saucepans laid down with shoes by the door. Anybody who can has called in to postpone their quiet nights together. Long necks are uncapped. Children stand around not knowing where to look. 2 saucepan lids crash. A violin is struck. The talk that 2 people make rises unsteady as smoke besides towering cypress trees. Thank you. So this poem here, I'm sure you relate to it, Nat. It's called, I'll tell you the title, it gives you a sense of what it's about. It's called Turning My Back on Australians Overseas. And yeah, but just this idea of when you're living overseas and if you live, and this is drawn from when I was living in England, in London, in the early 90s, and when you're living there, you sort of want to be surrounded by the people that are there. And of course, in London, people are from everywhere. And so when you see another Australian, you think, oh, right. And, you know, one time I was living in Manchester and I met a guy from Toulon, and that was pretty funny. But so, yeah, this is a sense when I was living there for a while and I thought I was going to stay there for longer. And, of course, you're reminded of your upbringing and your past, and, of course, the past comes back to haunt you all the time. So turning my back, and this is, the other thing is when I was working in a nightclub in London and catching the 4 a.m. night bus home. Yeah, some funny times happened there. Trafalgar Square, 4 a.m, waiting for the night bus to Harlesden. Sober after another night watching punters drink and shout to the rhythms of thrash metal. Like any local, I step away from a group of drunk Australians. As soon as I hear the accent, an inner dread begins of being reminded what it is I escape from. Questions, places, assumptions that I will share the view of backpackers from Kilmore. Somehow I avoided cricket, Earl's Court, but not the colonial jokes about neighbours. I left Australia on a one-way ticket, yet the gum trees and paddocks taunt me as their laughter slips into the chorus from flame trees. Someone's about to chunder. I turn away as if they were homeless. All I need is historic light, sharpening the walls of monumental buildings. Garbos going about their business. The N18 ferrying me deeper into a one-bedroom flat existence. Passengers dozing off or skinning up. The driver calling out each stop. The Australians' voices in my head, out of whack with the Danes, Italians and French I wanted to impress. Time. Okay. I'll read. This is a more bleak poem, and it's called "Escape to the Country." And yeah, so you know that show that's on TV. The hosts here get mentioned. Does everyone know what a maiden is, as in a lamb, a sheep? First time? All right. Okay. Escape to the country. What they say to you, what they will allow. The way they size you up at the school meet and greet, where nicknames are revived to pull you back down. Only men talk sport on the radio each Saturday. Here, the abattoir is the biggest employer in town. History is a timeline of a footballer's career. Locals know the wind on the crater walk, racehorses treading water on a foggy beach. Just don't mention the Umaralla Wars. Cradling a gun gave me the license I needed to kill. To belong, if necessary, watching kangaroos on the run, ramming themselves into dog fences. Later I could brood like a local over what I had done. The cold metallic barrel, dull wood grain stock stashed in the cool room ceiling. A secret I kept from my father, like a bullet in my pocket. I knew I was capable of killing what was no longer needed. We know more about the Cotswolds, Devon, the rugged beauty of Scarfell Pike than the Mundi, Hay Plain or Coronga Flats. Light and airy rooms, open plan, beams or wet areas for dogs, Alistair's bearded grin, Jules' puffer vests. We cry at the size of the range. We bank on a mystery house within commuting distance to London. The English life we subscribe to each Saturday night, dreaming of acreage, views, country as a backdrop to claim, while an Irish backpacker in Cudgee lifts the cups to 500 circling Frisians. Here a woman checks on her maidens each morning, bottle feeding, sheltering, pulling a dead lamb from a ewe, pushing a prolapsed uterus back in by hand. We escape the city to look for more time, a community where the neighbours are more than a person you wave to. Mist rises off fence posts, zero rentals in a coastal town. The country we keep watching, the country I keep driving to. All right. This is an old poem that I was fretting about having lost for a number of years. You ever had that experience? And, you know, we all have our systems of keeping things in our desks, in our drawers and everything. And I wrote this ages ago, I wanted to try and capture the the busyness of bringing up kids. You know, every day you're so busy doing this, you're so busy doing that. And so you'll see by the reference to a TV show at the end when it was written, but I think it still stands up, and it's a prose poem, and it's simply titled I Do This, I Do That, which is a reference to another poet, Frank O'Hara from America, who wrote a lot of poems about his daily life in New York, which was quite different to this. So this is a snapshot of what it was like for myself and my wife with our kids. Preparing breakfast for the girls, dressing them, making up Al's lunch for Kinder, cheese sandwiches, an orange, carrot sticks, crackers, a fruit cup that she won't eat, kissing A goodbye at 7 a.m, cramming in my own breakfast while I glance over the newspaper headlines, and if it is quiet, quickly read an article that appeals, gather the Kinder bag, drop Al off at Kinder, then drive to Drysdale to the Safeway for the house grocery shopping, return home, unpack groceries, prepare R's lunch, drive off to pick up the toy library key from Jan and do toy library duty from 11 to 12 p.m, with R easily entertained by the toys, yet she is falling asleep as I drive home. Keep her awake long enough to swallow some sandwiches and put her to bed. I have 2 hours off, well, sort of. I eat lunch, organise a load of washing, do an hour's weeding in the front garden, look at some poems, decide that I'm happy with them, pick R up and drive off to collect Al at 2:45, return home, unpack her bag, start the girls off playing outside on the swing and in the sandpit, hang out the washing, walk up to Catherine's with the girls for afternoon tea, an hour later return home, make the girls rockmelon snacks while I prepare dinner and they watch a video. We eat dinner, but the girls are crying, missing their mummy. After dinner, I bath them and then begin preparing their warm cups of milk before bed. When A arrives home at 7:30 p.m. and takes over the reading of books, I wash the dishes, tidy up the kitchen. Then after the girls are in bed, we catch up with our days at 8:45 p.m. I insist on a whiskey before Denton. Worn out by reading that. All right, it's the last poem from that this new collection. This is called Between a Paddock and a Hay Shed. And it's about looking at the country from an urban perspective. The longing begins when washing dishes, places you are called back to, in the supermarket car park, waiting at a roundabout, walking out of a fruit grocer into late afternoon light. Places that buffet, wash through you, the way a memory scrapes at a residue. I remember the groan and sway of a trailer, 130 bales stacked and bound, rocking to the rhythms of the load, fumes from the tractor lulling my brother into a stasis. 10 minutes nodding off to the lean of the axle, floorboards of the trailer creaking like old doors opening. A daydreaming, head-lolling space, the trailer rolling through shallow grassy drains, hay bales shifting their weight. From on top I counted the paddocks on our farm, ran my eye along the boundary fence, training myself to read distances, those blurred extended feelings between fence posts. But mostly I was clutching at the leaves of passing gum trees, looking to the treeless hump of a mountain to see what could become of my brother and I, sleeping on the job between a paddock and a hay shed. How are we going? Does anyone want to ask a question? Pardon? I was hoping you'd read from that. Yes, good. Yeah. I will. Does anyone have a question or anything? Feel free to ask. No. And actually I'd prefer if it wasn't, because I like to bang my head against something, being work. Now, I work full-time as a librarian at the secondary school where I teach at. And I was a teacher, been a teacher for 20 years and that. And, I mean, I've had time off. I've had grants and I've had long service leave and done some writing and that. And, you know, I appreciate those times, and you do. Certainly when I needed some for working on the memoir, but I don't know, I just like the, this is just for me, you're probably different than that, but I like the busyness of home and my kids and my wife, and working on poems, and always having something in my head, which is much to Alison's distraction maybe. But yeah, being regular with it, but you may not be writing a lot all the time and thinking about it. Whereas I wonder if I had more time, would I write as much? I think every writer needs some kind of tension in their lives to produce. And so this idea of writer's block I've never had. I've never had the time to have it. If that helps. But yeah, anything else? All right. This poem is a bit of a catalogue of some of the men I've worked with. And there's been some interesting guys. So it's just simply titled Men I Have Worked With. The timber worker who looked me in the eye and said he wanted to understand his mother. The father who wore white overalls and a hairnet, operating the cheese guillotine for 40 years. The quietly spoken manager who took a long lunch called me into the office and sacked me. The man who ordered a pie, a salve in batter, and beat me in table tennis each lunchtime. The man who talked with a roll in his mouth, the man who talked to himself while picking lemons, the saw sharpener who gave every tool a place and tried to give me words of advice. The man who slept in his bath when he couldn't find his bed. The man I caught having a bong behind a stack of flitches. The man with the DTs running offcuts through a circular saw. The short man with the large voice who allowed me a coffee cup after 3 months probation. The man who argued with his father, the owner of the business, then walked away shaking his head each day. The man who introduced me at after-work drinks to a man who was a bloke to see if you wanted someone killed. The man who paid for my long lunches but couldn't always pay wages. The man who sacked me after a morning's work because I wanted to stack sports equipment my way. The man who watered down clear spirits behind the bar to conceal the bottles of vodka and gin he was given to friends. The barman who gave me dirty looks when I caught him kissing women in the alleyway behind the bar. The man who smoked and swore through an interview, the principal who stepped aside from my interview to take a call, the man I returned to 3 times to ask my old job back and who still didn't give it to me. The man who wears shorts in winter, rocks on the balls of his feet, stands with his legs apart. The men who sit at a staff table with other men, waiting for someone to begin talking about sport. The man I learnt to build barbed wire fences with, and the man who has taught me to take them down. Thank you. All right, it might be time to finish. This is a poem that's set in Rosebrook and Killarney and Warrnambool. Does anyone remember Younger's department store? It gets a mention. And so it's sort of that era. And yeah, it's about one of my cousins. It's called The Violin Player. She relaxes into the rhythms of her bow, tapping her toes to Uncle Bill, swapping between accordion and mouth organ, a Killarney reel in a damp country kitchen. She will hum on a bus to the dancers, glancing at paddocks, stone crosses of the cemetery, a laughter-charged crowd bound for Saturday night at the Temperance Hall. She knits her way through baby jumpers, casting on, knit and purl, casting off while a sister takes the lead with the talk, the cooking. The smell of the onion harvest on her brother's hands she absorbs, along with his talk of pruning roses, of looking for an empty honey jar to take to the Swinton sale. She has learnt to listen, sitting in the back seat of a gold Holden Kingswood in the Youngers department store car park. Thick-rimmed glasses, silver necklace, pearl earrings. She smiles at the stories my mother gives her. Uncle Dick in the city, the term I have just finished, the leather seats her old person smells, gaps in the talk my mother looks at me to fill. The hours she wades through, unaccompanied, until her brother and sister return with brown shopping bags, loaded and particular, while she turns to afternoon sun warming her passenger window. The local fear of doctors has rendered her sightless. Sitting by the window of a front room, she listens to cousin talk of marriages, clearing sales, the 1946 floods when she saw the river rise above sheds, leaving piles of snakes writhing in its wake. She will never marry or endure a long-term relationship. Consigned to her favourite stool, memorising her way to the bedroom, bathroom, how winter sun strikes round a country room, the authority of a sister, the cunning of a small-time farmer brother, who would never make a will for fear of dying, a sister who could once swing a bow, smiling. Each time I trudged through the car park to the Kingswood, I'd carry questions about darkness I would never ask her. Thank you. I reckon might have a break, 5 minutes or so, get a drink, and then we'll come back with Nat.
And go buy Brandon's books.
And Nat's books. Okay, can we all take our seats, please? And we've got a real treat all the way from the US. Nat O'Reilly, who's come here, is on the final leg of his reading tour. Has been in New South Wales and South Australia, and now here. And I think you'll really love these poems. Can we please make him welcome Nat O'Reilly?
Thanks, Brendan. Can everyone hear me all right? Just want to make sure the microphone's set up properly. Yeah. Thanks so much to Jo and Blarney Books and her family and staff for having me here, and to Brendan. It's really, truly an honour to have Brendan read with me. I've been reading his poems for at least a decade. When I first found out about his work, I'm like, there's a poet from the Western District who grew up on a farm just down the road from the last farm my grandfather had, and writes about place, and my favourite poet is Seamus Heaney. And so it was just a connection from the start to his work, and today's the first time I met him in person. You know, we've had like emails and messages online and stuff, and he's even lovelier in person, right? just a great guy. And to be in port, as my pa would call it, because 3 syllables is too many, right? Why say 3 syllables and you can say 1? To be here is really wonderful. So my mum was born and raised here, and all of my grandparents are in the Port Fairy Cemetery. My mum's parents and dad's parents are literally 20 metres apart, and I've got great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents in that cemetery, so went and visited them all this morning, so it was great. Took my daughter and we walked around the island, went to the lighthouse. I mean, it was just an amazing day to be back and to see all those places. So I've moved around a lot in my lifetime. I was born in Warrnambool, but we lived in Ballarat, Melbourne, Shepparton, Brisbane. Then after I went to uni in Melbourne, my dad, he was a teacher, became a principal and vice principal, and he lived in Bendigo, Swan Hill, back to Melbourne. So they were always moving, but Port Fairy and Warrnambool, where my both sets of grandparents lived, they were always here, and this was like the place I could always come back to. So it's really fantastic to be here. So I'm going to start out reading a couple of older poems because of where I am today. So my mum's parents Michael and Lola Quigley. They lived on Villiers Street, number 10 Villiers Street. And their next door neighbours were the Conlons when I was a kid. And the Conlons had a lot of kids, and the two youngest boys, Tim and Greg, were about the same age as my brother and I. And we would spend every holidays, Easter, Christmas, you name it, we'd be at Nana and Pa's house. And we would just go climb the back fence and just go over and see Tim and Greg and play video games with them, and we would go surfing and all that stuff. And they were like my really good childhood friends. And Greg tragically died in a car accident in 2004. So I've got a couple of poems I'd like to read that are for him, dedicated to him. Just feels like the right thing to do. This one's called Breaking Surf. You knocked on the window of the room where I slept during holidays at my grandparents' and gestured for me to meet you at the back door. It was barely light. The surf was up at the East Beach, and sets of crystal tubes were rolling in. There was no time to lose. I pulled on my boardies and t-shirt, threw a beach towel around my neck, slipped my feet into a pair of thongs. I climbed a stepladder in the garage and eased my uncle's custom board down from its home in the rafters, stuffed a wetsuit inside the cover. With surfboards gripped under arms, we pedaled our bikes stealthily through the sleeping town, across the Moyne, uphill to the car park beside the Surf Lifesaving Club. We dropped our bikes against the fence, raced down the path onto the sand, tore the covers from our boards, hastily circled wax, impatiently tugged on wetsuits, and ran whooping, high-stepping, splashing into the breaking surf. Yeah, this is from my very first book. Chapbook came out in 2010 called Symptoms of Homesickness. By then, 2010, I'd been overseas for 15 years already. I left in 1995, planning to be gone for 2 years. Remember very clearly my mum at the airport weeping and saying, "You're never going to come back. You're going to meet someone and get married, and this is it." And I'm like, "Come on, Mum, it's 2 years. I'm just going backpacking, right?" And of course, Mum was right. Mum's always right. It's been 27 years. This is another one for Greg. It's called Yambuk. My grandmother sent me an article from the Warrnambool Standard describing the circumstances of your death. There was a picture of the fireball caused by your collision with the petrol tanker. The report stated that you appeared to have lost control of your ute while rounding a sweeping curve on the Portland Road near Yambuk. I hadn't seen you since our childhood, when I climbed the fence between your house and my grandparents to play Space Invaders, Asteroids and Frogger on your Atari. When we surfed at the East Beach and climbed the cannons at Battery Hill. Reading the word Yambuk reminded me of the day your dad paid us to work on his farm there, riding around on a motorbike, turning new hay bales on their sides. How could I forget you turning away for a moment and riding head-on into a bale, throwing us both over the handlebars? How was I to know you would never leave your hometown, never make it to the age of 30? How was I to know that you would die where my ticket of leave ancestors owned their first farm, that your blood and theirs would stain the same soil? Thank you. This next one I'm going to read from is my first full-length book called Distance. And this is a poem called Crabbing. This is for Greg as well. I took my daughter Celeste this morning to the exact spot where this poem is set. I'm kind of nostalgic, in case you hadn't guessed. Sitting on the docks by the Moyne, we knot fishing line around chunks of beef, lower them down through the water between the rocks beside the pylons, tempting crabs. Fishing boats moored nearby rock gently. We try to pronounce Russian and Norwegian names, baffled by the distance the boats have travelled, from the top to the bottom of the earth, just to fish. On the northern shore of the Southern Ocean, we look towards Antarctica, unable to grasp the vastness of space, where fishermen trawl far above their prey. Tugging on our lines, the crabs surrender. We draw them up into the air, deposit them into buckets, impressed by our ability to take them out of their world. Just to lighten the mood a bit, I spent a lot of time in Ireland. So my grandfather, Mick Quigley, who lived here for 60 years or so, he was born and raised in Dublin and emigrated here after the Second World War. So I've got Irish citizenship, and I've probably spent as much time in Ireland over the last 27 years as I've spent here, partly because it's so much easier to get there from the US. It's only an 8-hour flight, and sometimes you can get a return trip for $500, whereas to come here now is like $2,500. So I spent a lot of time there, and one of the things you find if you spend any time in Ireland is everybody can sing a song and play a song and perform a dance, and like they have all these amazing skills. And if you find yourself in a drinking session that goes along long enough, they're going to say, all right, what do you got? Do your bit. And then you're really embarrassed when you can't. And they're like, but you're a poet. Don't you have all your poems memorized? Well, no, why would I have them memorized? I'd read them out of a book. But I do have one memorized because it's really short and it's only 4 lines. And it's a local poem. It's set in Warrnambool. It's called The Whalers Inn. So this is how it goes. After 4 quick gin and tonics at the Whalers Inn in Warrnambool, she threw up on the traffic island and told me she loved me. It is a true story. You've been there too. The same girl, the same traffic island. But it's one of those things too where it's like, well, was that a moment of total inhibition and you told me the truth, or was it just the gin and tonic talking? I'll never know. So I left the country 6 months later. I'm going to read some books, some poems from Unbelonging. This is my book that came out in 2020. So I was supposed to do this reading tour in Australia then and have a launch in Sydney and everything, and that was supposed to be in May of 2020. Then, of course, we know what happened. So this is my first time here since. So I've mostly been reading from this book on this trip. The first one is called Your Gaze. It's G-A-Z-E. And it's after Gerald Murnane's novel, The Plains, which is one of my favourite books. And I was driving back from Adelaide yesterday, and I was within 50 k's of Gurrook, where he lives and retired to. I was like, man, I could just go and see Gerald and knock on the door and go through his archives and drink some beer with him. But, he doesn't know me, so it was just a weird fantasy. But, this is a poem partly inspired by that book and partly inspired by my high school years in Shepparton. Yesterday, I found a photograph taken in 1988 on the Oval after school. You wore a green tartan skirt, a white blouse, black stockings, a bottle green blazer and black Clark's school shoes. Your gaze ignores the camera, focuses on the plains north of school where we roamed on winter afternoons until twilight, watched rabbits bound towards their burrows and kangaroos descend upon the creek to drink. The plains where sheep grazed upon lush grass while we lay together in a hollow sheltered from the westerly. Your auburn hair curtaining our faces, apricot scent of shampoo in my nostrils, your tongue in my mouth, hands inside my woolen jumper. The plains erased from the map in 99 when bulldozers scraped the landscape, destroyed all vegetation, and the new suburb was erected. Cul-de-sacs, boulevards, courts, crescents, quarter-acre blocks, brick veneer houses, colour-bond fences, concrete footpaths and backyard pools. In the photograph, your gaze writes an invisible history only we can read. Thanks. So I'm going to read like an Irish poem. So first time I went to Dublin, it was 1996, and I went to visit my pa's brother, one of his brothers. My pa was one of 12. I think 8 survived to adulthood. I went to visit Uncle Sean, and he told me this story that he thought was the funniest thing. He just couldn't stop laughing. It was a story about my great-great-grandfather drowning. And so this is the story. Grand Canal drowning. My great-great-grandfather drowned in the Grand Canal on his way home from the pub. Great-uncle Sean told the story, laughing at the absurdity of a 6'3" man drowning in a canal only 5'10" deep. Stumbling across dark fields towards his sleeping family, the Guinness he'd put away, combined with a cloudy night, didn't give him a chance. He plunged face first into the water, swallowed a dirty pint in surprise, never found his feet. 120 years later, I set out to hike the Grand Canal from Dublin to the Shannon. On the third day, Ireland's hottest on record, I stood stranded on the wrong side of the water, blocked by blackthorn thickets. Unwilling to walk miles back to the nearest bridge, I attempted a crossing, hoisted my pack onto my head and stepped into the muddy canal. I sank to my right knee and panicked, convinced another step forward would suck me to the bottom. Suddenly, a 6'3" drowning man in a 5'10" canal was no joke. I threw my pack back to the bank, turned, crawled onto ancestral ground. Okay. And feel free to ask questions at any time. I'm used to reading in Ireland where people are really noisy and it's almost always in pubs, and so most people are kind of half drunk or three-quarters drunk, and they'll just call out and yell out stuff and cheer and clap and boo and hiss. It's great. It's just wonderful. Like, it's good to be interactive. You know, we're not at a university. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Is that poetry? My Lady of the... Yeah. Yeah, yeah. 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 Okay. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Yeah. Well, like Brendan's book, The Lowlands of the Moyne. I mean, it's just a beautiful title. It sounds like a ballad, like something you want to just heard sung to you, right? It's got this lovely rhythm to it. So speaking of singers, didn't plan that, but this is a poem called Cave and Cohen. So it's referring to Nick Cave and Leonard Cohen, two of my favourite musicians, singers, lyricists, etc. This is for my better half, Trisha. She's currently in France on a hike, 10-day hike at Mont Blanc. Because she thinks this stuff's boring. She's done it so many times. We spent a winter evening reclining in front of the fire, listening to Cave and Cohen, working our way through glass after glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. We sang along in whispers as the kindling crackled and the logs spat sparks, closed our eyes and escaped into lyric conjured universes. Envisioned desperate men trudging through snow, lamenting lost loves in desolate landscapes, kneeling on stone church floors. Dapper, dark men in tailored suits, struggling to conquer grief, summoning beauty from darkness, crying out to a distant God. Who's better? Well, I have to say Leonard, because I think without Leonard Cohen there'd be no Nick Cave. And the reason I say that is, so I don't know, maybe Joe has the book. There's a great biography of Nick Cave came out recently called Boy on Fire by Mark Mordieu. And Mark he's a music journalist from Sydney, and Mark had a lot of access to Nick Cave's family and friends and schoolmates and former girlfriends and Nick Cave's mum and all these people in Wangaratta, where he grew up, as well as in Melbourne. And it just goes through until he's about 24, 25. There's going to be another one later on. But there's this really interesting moment in it where Nick Cave's about 13. He's from a kind of artistic family. Like, his dad's a high school English and drama teacher. His dad's very involved in local theatre. His mum has forced him to take piano lessons and forced him to sing in the choir at the Anglican Church. So it's, I think, where a lot of the biblical imagery, right, comes through in his work, Raised in the Church. But he's also this real rebel kid, right? And he's got a really good mate who's got an older sister, and I think we've all been there when you're about 13, 14, and you've got this friend with an older sister who's like 16, and she's like this goddess, right? You know, she goes to Melbourne on the weekends and goes to pubs and gigs, and, you know, and so he's hanging out with this older sister, and she's like, you think you like music, let me play you something. And she gets out Leonard Cohen's Songs of Love and Hate on vinyl, right, and plays it, and he just sits there and listens. He's just enraptured. And he's like, this is where it's at. This is what I want to do. This is who I've got to be. So, yeah, it's the genesis, right? Nick Cave, I'd say, is with Leonard Cohen. Yeah.
I go the other way.
You think Nick Cave's better? Yeah. I mean, one thing I would say, I took Celeste, my daughter, to see Nick Cave and Warren Ellis a couple months ago. Sorry. Yeah. I took my daughter to see Nick Cave and Warren Ellis a couple months ago in Texas, and I've seen Nick a few times, and he's got an amazing magnetism as a performer that's just, you have to be born with it. It's something I've never seen in anybody else. And I've seen a lot of really great bands, you know, people like Dylan, Van Morrison, U2, R.E.M., all these, The Cure, all these great bands. And he was on a different level, but almost the level was a bit scary. Like if he had told someone in the audience murder someone, they probably would do it. You know, he just had this power over people, right? And I don't know if Leonard Cohen had that because I didn't see him live, you know, so, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
No more of this touching perfect bodies with your mind.
Yeah, it is a great one. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
That's really
Well, that's a great little story because that's actually my introduction to Leonard Cohen was through that song or poem, right? So I've got an aunt and uncle. We've got many aunts and uncles that live in this area, but one of my aunts and uncles who live in Warrnambool, Mick and Lorraine would always talk about how much Mick loved Leonard Cohen, and she hated it, and she would always call it music to hang yourself by. And at the time, I'd never heard the music, but my first year of uni at Monash, we had this big anthology. It was like the Norton Anthology of Poetry, and Leonard Cohen's Suzanne was in there as a poem. It was that good that it stood alone and was considered a great poem, not just a great song. So that was when I thought, oh, there's something to this. It's not just music to hang yourself by. Yeah. Yeah, like he won the biggest poetry prize in Canada, the Governor General's Prize as a poet, and then was a novelist as well. Right, you know, he's done it all. Yeah, amazing. Okay, I'm going to read another one. This is called Unbelonging. This is like the title poem of the collection. 22 years ago, I returned from the Northern Hemisphere for the first time after 2.5 years away, escaped from a London winter with snow on the ground to a searing Melbourne summer. I rode the bus to Canberra to renew a distance-damaged friendship. We drove north from the bush capital to Bathurst. Along the way, I introduced her to the tragically hip, road apples and phantom power. She gave me the gift of grace. We navigated through drought-browned land, through Gundaroo, Gunning and Gurrindar, stopped to swim somewhere unnamed by settlers. After Europe, the distance between towns seemed immense, the land a nothingness, my Anglo-Celtic skin foreign and ridiculous. Taking turns driving, attempting reintegration, I wondered if I could ever belong again after so much time and distance. In Bathurst, I slithered down the water slide at the public pool with the freckled kids, swam laps while she sat in the shade, rolled joints beside the back fence, smoked behind gum trees. That evening, she joined her choir performing Handel's Messiah in a local church. I sat stoned in the gallery, the closest to heaven I'd been in years. We ditched the Godbotherers after the concert and drove down to the Macquarie, where we rolled our own, talked into the early hours, diminished the distance between us, and finally drifted into dreams beside the whispering river. All right, so you up for a few more? Yeah? I got 3 more on my list, so I can read at least those, but I can improvise too. All right, so try and lighten up a little bit. I have a lot of poems that are elegies, that are nostalgic, that are about missing people and places. You know, I've been outside Australia 27 years. I didn't plan to be gone that long. I planned to be gone 2 years. I consider myself now an accidental immigrant to the US. It took me a long time to get to that place. For a long time, I thought of myself as an expatriate, and I was for a while. But after a while, when you keep saying next year, we'll move back next year, we'll move back next year. And, my spouse is American and we have an American daughter now and we have these academic jobs in America. It just gets harder and harder and harder to leave, right? To give up that life. And I eventually got to a point where I had to accept I'm not an expatriate anymore. I live here. I've been here for years. I'm an immigrant, even if I wasn't that kind of person like my grandfather from Ireland who said, there's nothing for me in Ireland after the Second World War. There's no jobs. I got to go somewhere else and start a new life. A very conscious leaving behind of a place. I never had that. It was just kind of happened by accident, right? So I had to accept that was my place. So there's a lot of poems about those kind of issues, and you constantly always been asked, where are you from? Who are you? Feeling like you never really fit in anywhere, right? And even in a place like Port Fairy or Warrnambool, I was born in Warrnambool, and my grandparents had farms all around the area. I could never be a local here, right? I didn't go to school here, I didn't grow up here, and maybe my mum's not even a local anymore because she left when she was 18, right? So there's all those different ways in which you're excluded from communities, even if you want to be a part of the community. So I've felt like I spent most of my life as an outsider. So that comes up in a lot of the poems, but occasionally I write something I think is funny. Try anyway. This is one. So you might remember when the former guy was elected president in the US. We won't say his name. I refer to him as Tiny Dictator, with an emphasis on the dick. He had this press secretary named Sean Spicer, and he came out after the inauguration and said, the crowd was this big, so big, so many people were there. And they were fake photos. They were photos from Obama's inauguration, right? Because the real photos that showed how small the crowd was. So then the media started talking about this thing called alternative facts, right? And that was what they were using. So I thought it would be funny to write an alternative facts bio. This is a different version of myself. My favorite subject at school was physics. I always wanted to drive a monster truck. I play the harp, penny whistle, and bone. I keep a rabbit's foot in my pocket for luck. I'm 6'6", my hair lustrous and black. I speak fluent Farsi, Mandarin, and Icelandic, and can order beer, ouzo, and heroes in Greek. I ran the Reykjavik Marathon in 2 hours and 20 minutes, setting a course record. My first wife was Elle Macpherson. I traded her in for a newer model. I scored a triple century on debut for Australia during the Boxing Day test at the MCG. 1.25 million people attended my graduation and gave a 45-minute standing ovation. Oh. Let me see. All right, so Brendan's put in a request. It's a poem called The Confessions of Donald J. Trump. I said his name. Thanks, mate. And what I did with this one is he gave his very first press conference, which was this kind of incoherent, rambling disaster, right? And I thought, well, it'd be interesting to take all these lines from the transcript and then try and make a poem of it. And so I did that. And then when I sent this manuscript to my publisher, Recent Work Press in Canberra, Shane Strange, who's the editor, he's like, look, it's good, I like it, it works, but it's too much Trump. It's too, we can't handle this, cut it in half. So this is half of what it used to be. And part of it is his vocabulary is so small. There's the same words just keep coming up over and over again. Yeah, it's Bigley, right? Bigley was one. So this is the poem, Confessions of Donald J. Trump, and it's supposed to be a little bit of a riff as well on Love Song of Jalfred Prufrock, right? Well, the leaks are real. I mean, the leaks are real. The leaks are absolutely real. The news is fake because so much of the news is fake. I was coming into office. I want to find a friendly reporter. Are you a friendly reporter? Now that's what I call a nice question. We had a very, very big margin. By the way, it would be great if we could get along with Russia. I'm not ranting and raving, I'm just telling you, you're dishonest people. But I'm not ranting and raving. I love this. I'm having a good time doing it. I don't mind bad stories. Look, I want to see an honest press. Yes, this is going to be a bad question, but that's okay. It would be the electric chair. Okay? He should be put in the electric. You would even call for the institution of the death penalty. I see tone. You know the word tone? The tone is such hatred, and it's all about unification. And he's had a tremendous career, and he will be, I think, a fantastic addition. Some people are so surprised that we're having strong borders. I'm not going to tell you anything about what I'm going to do. I'm not going to talk about military stuff. I don't have to tell you what I'm going to do in North Korea. Nuclear holocaust would be like no other, and I'll get killed. I don't have to tell you. Your ratings aren't as good as some of the other people that are waiting. To be honest, I inherited a mess. A mess at home and abroad, a mess. The stock market has hit record numbers. Tremendous disservice. The level of dishonesty is out of control. We're going to take care of it all. Hillary Clinton did a reset. Remember, with a stupid plastic button that made us all look like a bunch of jerks? And the wall is going to be a great wall, and it's going to be a wall negotiated by me. Every country takes advantage of us, almost. I guess it was the biggest electoral college win since Ronald Reagan. This administration is running like a fine-tuned machine, despite the fact that I can't get my cabinet approved. President Putin called me out very nicely to congratulate me on the win of the election. I have nothing to do with Russia. I told you, I have no deals there. I have no anything. Yeah, that's it. That's actually the first time I ever read that. I tried to avoid it. It was fun to write, but then I was like, why did I do that? Because I might have to read it sometime, and thank you. In case you haven't guessed, I'm no fan of Trump. The day that Biden was elected in our household was one of the best days the last 20 years. We had champagne. People were literally dancing in the streets all across the country. It was something else. It was almost like some kind of revolution. Unfortunately, not enough has changed since, but it was a great day. It was
like May 21 here.
Yeah. And I'm so thankful that you all got rid of ScoMo before I arrived. It was really generous of you. Yeah. I got hassled big time in Sydney at the airport because I hadn't renewed my Australian passport. It expired in February. And I thought there was no point renewing it because I don't know when they're going to open the border again, when I can come back. Like one of my best friends, she's one of my colleagues, she's from Sydney, her mum died of COVID, not of COVID, but during COVID a year ago, and she couldn't go to the funeral. You know, it's like there were so many ways in which those of us who are citizens living overseas thought we were really treated poorly by the government. Not to mention all their other policies, right? So I just didn't feel like I needed to renew it because I've got an Irish passport, I've got an American passport, I didn't need it. And the guy's like, why didn't you renew it? And I told him why. And he's like, well, there's a red flag in the system. Like he took all my stuff to a back room, made me wait, you know. He's like, every time you come in, this is going to happen to you unless you renew your passport. So now I feel like I have to just to avoid the hassle. But honestly, after being here for the last couple of weeks, it's been an amazing trip, a wonderful trip. And like a lot of my ideas I got about Australia over the last 2 years have really changed. Because all I was getting was all the negative stuff about the previous government through social media, through friends and family. And even if they weren't talking about that government specifically, like the people in it, everything about Australian life that I was getting for the last couple of years was really negative. And it just seemed like there's no future there, there's no reason to go back, life is crap, you know. And then you get here and that's just this weird filtering. It's not the daily reality, I don't think, of most people. So yeah, it's been wonderful. I'm going to try and keep coming back every year, and I'm going to renew my passport. All right, 2 more? Is that good? All right, so this one is for my dad's dad, Peter George O'Reilly. If you want, you can go visit him in the cemetery up the road. So my mum's family, just a little quick ad-lib, my mum's family have been in the area here since 1840. They were convicts in Tasmania, and when they got the ticket of leave, they came over to Yambuk and started farming there, and that's how the family's been ever since. My dad's family, they had all emigrated from Ireland and England to South Australia, McLaren Vale, Willunga, Aldinga, that whole area. And then they moved to this area in 1960. And my pa's first farm in the area was at Koroit, the K place. And then he also had a farm at Timboon, which is pretty close to where you grew up, right? And so that gets a mention in this one. So he died in 2017, or just short of his 90th birthday. He had really good innings. In another hemisphere, across half a continent and an ocean, my grandfather lies dying. I am unable to hold his hand, kiss his forehead, share a long neck of Carlton Draft, say, remember when your bull almost gored me at Timboon? I should have listened to you and stayed on the tractor. My daughter loves the painting of the galah you gave her last time we visited, before we had to put you in the home. The Jerilderie letter is pure Irish bush poetry. I often recall the taste of the molasses you gave me from the bucket in the dairy after milking. You never told me your favourite Slim Dusty song. I never cared that I didn't catch any fish when you took me fishing at Logan's Beach. I just wanted to watch you cast out beyond the breaking waves, reel in whiting after whiting as if they were waiting for you to bring them home. I always admired the way you broke the necks of the kittens we found in the Hessian sack beside the rubbish bin in the beach car park. You were stoic in your mercy, but I saw the tear before you erased it with the back of your sun-damaged hand. All right, so this last one, it's called Beach Ballet. This one's actually set in Ireland. You can actually surf in Ireland. They've got some really good surf spots there. And so there's a place called Lahinch, which is where the poem is set. In the midst of an Irish heatwave, lying on a longboard in the swale at Lahinch, chatting with a Paul Kelly lookalike between sets, I look over my right shoulder towards the beach and watch a tween girl catch a wave, rise to her feet, balance gracefully, knees bent, arms wide and relaxed, ride all the way to the shallows before stepping lightly off the side of the board into knee-deep foam. The girl's ride is almost complete before I recognize her as my daughter, just 20 minutes into her first lesson, adapting, evolving, becoming herself. Thanks a lot. You've been a really good audience. Really feel really welcome. Thank you. And again, questions and...
Oh, I was going to say something. Yeah, thanks, Nat. And it's always great to get a view of Australia from slightly outside, and to see the story, or to hear the story of your journey back here and how you feel now. So, can we give Nat another round of applause? Yep, come up. And I'm not sure of your name, so just tell us who you are, and then you can read your poems.
Thanks. My name is Richard Walter. Good to meet you for the first time, Brendan. I've seen some of your poetry, and I feel a little bit at odds getting up in front of these much published poets, I must confess. So it's a great privilege. Excuse my shakes, they're not all to do with being up here. I'm sure there's something in here I can read. Oh. The theme right from the start tonight has been this local connection, and I've got a couple here I'd just like to read in that context. The first one is called An Awakening. Between the roaring surf and the silence of settlement, the tide line glimmers beneath a black, starlit sky. Red, white and green navigation markers blink across the bay. Sodium lights, dots and dashes of street lamps line the river and mark an awakening port. Muffled voices float by as Putty's pride, darkened, slips her lines and throbs by glistening walls out to sea. A scarlet slash signals the dawn, light in the gloom as an orange glow links sea and sky. the tide line shines in the sun to the watcher on the shore. Oh, good. It's a wonderful boat, and I understand it's for sale. Yes, and it's a very distinctive part of the port. It would be nice if someone from here was able to buy it. Yeah, yes. You'll all be familiar with the former railway's cargo shed. And I wrote this about 2 years ago now. And I've called it the cargo cult. More relic now than asset, the goods shed is a window to the past. Rolling towards entropy, its timbers shiver behind the protection of shunted words. No entry, sleeping or alcohol, and keep out. Signs indicating terminal abandonment. It is a grey platform of exchange on massive stumps aligned at a siding. The timber frame, capped with rusted corrugated iron and vertical corrosion, assailed by the ravages of water, rot and vandal abuse. With cargo moving from door to door in trucks, strips of rail line were sold for scrap. Lines that defined the yard lost, save for the railway reserve. Heavy railway track became bike trail, the rhythmic harmony of racketing rolling stock, the music of bike bell and bird song. Lines from friends tell us it cannot endure. Neglect, despair, and good intentions abound, together as the once practical portal becomes the ghost figure of a different town. With the single silver line out, a network of desire lines converge, carrying new expectations. Cyclone mesh and multifarious council quail in the face of change, all for the want of a role, steps on the pathway to a better future. Is that a whistle in the distance? It is the guard making the final call. All aboard. And perhaps if you'll forgive me just one more. This is called The Sea is Full. I'm in the habit of having walks along the beach, particularly early in the morning, and a lot of the material that I relied on has come from that source. The sea is full. All seems still, yet still the heavens move. Earth spins endlessly round the solar hearth. The moon is full and the sea heaves upon the shore. A pied oyster catcher scurries in the wash. The sea is full, the river too, its banks lost amidst rusted salt marsh, where waterfowl raise their nests and breed once more. A white-faced heron stalks the shallows, cygnets dabble in the marsh, and shorebirds flee to drier reaches other shores. On the waning moon, the sea and river drain, revealing mudflats, rocks and pools, where sandpipers and stilts probe the margins, and turns skim the early dawn until all is still again. Could I just say, we were talking about the connections that come in gatherings like this with people who live in Port Fairy. Part of it is people coming from elsewhere and so forth. But just hearing what Nat was saying earlier, Colin Cave, Nick Cave's father, taught me at Hamilton High School before he went to Wangaratta. And Colin was very active then in the theatre arts and local drama. And my parents, Mum was a very good pianist and my father sang, and they were always involved in the plays and things that Colin wrote and were put on locally. So we knew them well. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard, for that anecdote. That's great. Wonderful to hear poems. Ray Liversidge, are you up next?
Okay, I will read this poem because we've talked about sense of place and not being accepted, etc., etc. So when I lived near the cemetery, my daily walk, I took myself through the cemetery. I'm not sure why. And this poem came out of those daily walks. There is a number of graves dedicated to children, those who are stillborn and died very young, amongst other graves. Anyway, this poem came out of that. This person is fictitious. It's called Requiem. Our daily walk takes longer now, but you still insist on passing through the cemetery with its ever-growing number of headstones. You taught her grandmother when we lived in Warrnambool, you tell me again. And his son, you repeat, never returned from the war in Vietnam. And, as is our habit, we stop to rest at the rotunda where, as usual, you turn away from the babies' graves. And I respectfully deflect the trembling requiem. Not cheerful, I know. All right, there's been lots of poems about water and fishing and the ocean. This one is from my chapbook called The Divorce Papers. And the subject matter is obviously self-evident. This is called Half Moon Bay, Black Rock, circa 1972. And it's prefaced by a line from Bob Dylan, who said, "Every hair is numbered like every grain of sand." The signs were already there, if only we'd bothered to look. No standing on the road, no boating by the sea. But desire knows no prophecy nor listens to rumours of rain. Beneath the cliff face storied with middens, mirror bush shimmering with water and moonlight, we defied the weather and the gods. I sat you on a blanket and opened a book by Baudelaire. I remember you asking what fleur de mal meant as I leant forward and let down the dark tendrils of your hair. Some 30 years later, as I drive around Red Bluff, I can feel the bay bending again to my will, see your face flashing past Ricketts Point like a stranger's on a reel of Super 8. Witness Westgate Bridge deconstructing, watch the waves retreating in slow motion to the Cerberus, and our love, like a breakwater, holding back the ocean. And finally, I'll read one of my more recent poems, of which the title is nearly as long as the poem. The title is On Hearing the News That She Has Won the Pulitzer Prize, Elizabeth Bishop celebrates by consuming not one, but 2 Oreos. True. And this is a reference to one of her most famous poems, The Fish. Having caught it, you now want to return this tremendous fish to the sea, but it's been filleted and fried, grilled and anthologised to death. No matter, it was an ugly fish, what with several hooks through its lower lip, and its loss is no disaster. The ocean is vaster than imagined, so how easy it can be to miss the light flickering on the dinted bow of your boat. Your rainbow boat, of which you are master. Thank you.
Is there anyone else would like to read a poem? No, I feel like an auctioneer here. All right. Okay, well, I think that might call it a day, but stick around for more signings or drinks. And first of all, thanks again, Nat, for reading. Thanks, Joe, for hosting and for giving poetry a space in Port Fairy.
I just want to say thanks, Brendan, for reading with me. Real honour and pleasure to have you here to hear you read. And thanks so much, Joe, for having us. And thanks for a wonderful audience and the great readings from the open mic. It's just been a really wonderful afternoon. I'm really glad I made the trip. Yeah, thanks so much.